Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to have you all here. Gosh, how exciting. Hello, everyone. This is Lisa Levinson, and I'm here to be your host for our Vegan Spirituality Online Gathering. So that's what we're doing today. We are gathering together to explore veganism as a spiritual practice. And this program is part of In Defense of Animal Sustainable Activism campaign, which offers emotional and spiritual tools for animal activists and for vegans around the world, which is so great. So today we have a very special guest with you. Before we introduce her, I'd like to let you know that if you're interested in exploring vegan spirituality, you can do that in your own vicinity. We have groups all across the country, and hopefully we will around the world, of people who gather together each month in person to explore veganism as a spiritual practice. And you can do that as well. Go to veganspirituality.com and look under groups, and you'll see if there's a group in your area. We host this online meeting for those who are not in the area of an in-person meeting, and also just to have more opportunities to connect. It's so great to connect with like-minded souls and to really explore what it means to be vegan and spiritual in our society today. So again, my name's Lisa Levinson, and it's my pleasure to introduce you first to my co-host, Judy Carmen. She's the author of Peace to All Beings, which is one of my favorite books. And now, Judy, how are you doing today?
Hi, Lisa. Good to be here. Hi, everybody. So glad you joined us. So I am excited to introduce Sarah Withrow King. She is with us tonight, and we're really grateful to her for joining us. She's busy at a conference in San Francisco that we might want to hear a little bit about that, but she took the time out to be with us. So, in addition to being a long-term animal activist, Sarah is also the co-director of CreatureKind and the deputy director of Evangelicals for Social Action at the Cider Center of Eastern University. She holds an MTS with a concentration in Christian faith and public policy from Palmer Theological Seminary. Sarah is the author of, and listen to these great titles, Animals Are Not Ours. No, really, they're not. And then the subtitle is An Evangelical Animal Liberation Theology. How awesome is that? And her second book is Vegangelical, How Caring for Animals Can Shape Your Faith. She also writes for ESA. That must be Evangelicals for Social Action, CreatureKind, and Red Letter Christians. Sarah lives in Oregon with her husband and son, and they share their home with 2 rescued dogs and 2 former street cats. So, yay for that. And the website for CreatureKind that we might want to put down, Lisa, so people can find it is becreaturekind.org. So we'll get started so we can listen to Sarah instead of me. Sarah, we want to hear how you discovered veganism and vegan activism. So tell us something about your history with all this.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's very good to be here with like-minded people, here virtually with like-minded people. Maybe I'm wrong, but in some ways, if you're vegan in this world, you're automatically an activist, right? Because every time you sit down to eat with non-vegans, you're likely going to get asked, why aren't you eating what everybody else is eating? And then you're going to have an answer. So activism, I think, kind of came right along with the choice to change my diet and what I wore and what I used, in my household, the whole 9 yards. But I was originally introduced to the concept of veganism through a leaflet that was left on a restaurant table. I was, at that point in time, the last person in my family to stop eating animal products. A couple of them have since gone back. But my brother took me to a vegan restaurant, and on the table there was a flyer that talked about factory farming in a way that I had never read before. It was the early 2000s. It was quite a long time ago. But I read about the debeaking of chickens, and I had a relationship with a chicken in high school as part of a hatching experiment, right, in biology. I didn't know any better, didn't know to protest that at the time, but I had become very attached to Simon, my chicken, and at the end of the pecking order experiment or whatever it was, we were supposed to give our chickens back, and there was no way that I was releasing Simon back to Mr. Herbert, the biology teacher. Like it wasn't happening. And so Simon went to live with some friends of ours who lived out in the country because backyard chicken keeping in our city wasn't a thing. So we couldn't keep him. And he had a great life out in the country. He lived for many more years. But I read about what happens to chickens like Simon and to hens, and was pretty horrified. And I thought, there's no way that I can continue to support this industry that does this to animals who have personalities and desires and a will to live like Simon did. I made the connection between what I was eating and an individual animal for the first time. That was eye-opening, but my behavior didn't change permanently for probably another year after that. I tried a couple of times to go vegan. My brother was vegan at the time, but other than that, I wasn't really surrounded by people who had adopted a plant-based diet or who knew what animal rights were or who could walk alongside me as I made the transition. And I failed a couple of times. And then I moved in with a friend who wanted to go vegan, and it stuck and never looked back.
That's great. What a great story. And it's so true. You need vegan friends. It makes a huge difference and helps
Yeah, and I'm grateful
so much.
that now we have the internet now, right? So I can be connected with vegan friends in other cities, even if I don't have any in the city that I'm living in, and I can commiserate with them about commiserate or collaborate or try to figure out how to address a particular situation, with other vegan parents, for instance, even though I may not have vegan parent friends in my city. And that wasn't available back then. Facebook didn't exist didn't exist to my knowledge when I first went vegan. So that's been quite a revolution as well.
Yeah, it has. It's helped a lot. A lot of us to get the word out. It's been amazing. Even though it has its downside.
Yeah, for better, for worse.
Upside.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the conference that you're at right now. Sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah, I just learned about it last week, although it apparently is a big deal. So I'm attending a series of events at a cathedral here in San Francisco that are for faith communities who are working to fight climate change. They're affiliated events with the Global Climate Action Summit that's happening in San Francisco. But I don't have the credentials to go to the big conference. I'm just going to the little baby one that's specifically for faith communities. And it's been really interesting it's been interesting and encouraging to see that there are really dedicated and really committed people and resources for them across a wide spectrum of faith expressions, and who are extraordinarily committed to lessening our footprint on the earth, right? I mean, we've done a lot of damage. It's going to be very difficult to roll back that damage if possible, but to try to raise awareness in their communities where they can and make changes where they can in their communities is really important work, and there are a lot of people doing it, and it's really good to be amongst people who care deeply about the choices that individuals make, the choices that we make as individuals that impact huge systems, and particularly in the context of faith, whatever the faith is. It's been a good time. A lot to learn.
I'll bet. So are you seeing any awareness there about the connection between animal agriculture and our impact on the earth?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, one of the organizations who helped bring together this particular set of events that drew me in had a petition. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but they had a petition and asked individual people to make and congregations to make very specific commitments related to climate change. And they were in 4 broad categories, transportation being one, I think energy use being one, can't remember the third, but the 4th category was food. And nearly, and which is, I know that there's a reputation, I know, among that, so many in the environmental movement seem to want to change light bulbs, but not what's on, our plates. And in this particular instance, there's a whole category just related to food, and many of the options under that food category were, reduce the animal product intake, adopt a completely plant-based diet, eat, and variations on that theme. So I was really encouraged by that, and I was excited to check the box that I already did that.
Yeah, wow, that is really encouraging.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised and really pleasantly surprised. So that's a really good trend.
That petition was put together by an organization called Green Faith that works in an interfaith context.
It's called
to raise awareness of climate change. Green Faith.
Oh, Green Faith. Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So I wanted to ask you about your books. The Animals Are Not Ours. No, really, they're not. And Evangelical Animal Liberation Theology, that's one of them. And the other one is Vegangelical, How Caring for Animals Can Shape Your Faith. So tell us about your books and how we might use them to make a case for veganism with Christians.
Yeah. The first book, Animals Are Not Ours, is a version of my graduate thesis. So I went to seminary specifically to learn what my faith had to say about animals. I had been working for about 9 years in the animal rights movement, and I was feeling an increasing disconnect between what I believed to be true and what I was hearing in church. And I just felt like I was living with a foot in 2 worlds, one in the animal world and one in the church world. And I really felt strongly that gap could be bridged. So I went to seminary, and every paper that I wrote was about animals, and eventually decided to write a thesis about animals and Christianity. But I would read a lot of different theologies about embodiment, about salvation, about creation care, the pursuit of justice generally, God's heart for the poor, and what I tried to do in Animals Are Not Ours is make the next step from those theologies to include animals, right? Because most theologians that I was reading at that time didn't explicitly include non-human creatures in their theological musings, and that's changed dramatically over the last 10 years. There's a huge amount that you can read now from Christian theologians and Christian ethicists specifically about the human relationship to non-human animals. But when I was in seminary, it was less. So I wanted to try to show what that would look like to say creation care, for instance, to explicitly include non-human creatures in theologies of care for creation. Evangelical was a fun book to name. It just came to me. And that was really a book I wrote kind of for my dad. My dad is my dad takes the Bible very seriously, as Christians probably should, and wanted a very clear and simple rationale for caring for animals as an expression of Christian faith. And what I found I could really boil that down to was that God created the whole world. God loves the whole world. The whole world is God's. Humans are made in God's image, and our job as humans is to reflect the love of God to the entire world and to foster a world that allows every being to flourish as God intended. And that we humans have drastically bastardized that charge, made dominion rather than a thing of care and of flourishing. We've made it domination and power, and that knowing that the world, as Christians, believing that the world will be reconciled back to God, the Creator, it's our responsibility to push into that and not to just sort of throw up our hands and say, well, the world's messed up, so I'm going to continue to behave as I've always behaved, and to make the same merciless choices that I've always made. And so as an expression of God's love for us, as an expression of God's love for creation, as an expression of our love for one another and for God and for God's creation, we ought to press more fully into that vision that we see, that we read about in Isaiah 11 and elsewhere, where the wolf and the lamb lie down together, and this peaceable kingdom idea that we know is coming. And just because it's not here doesn't mean we can't live as well as we can into it now. That's it. I think you might be muted, Judy.
Yeah,
no problem.
You said that a lot of the theologians, Christian theologians now, are really becoming more aware of the animal issue and connection. What do you think has caused that and brought that about?
Well, clarify. A lot more are people who, like my partner in CreatureKind, David Clough, who have been writing about animals and Christian responsibility to animals for a number of years, and who are being heard now by their peers, and by the people that their peers teach, and who eventually go on to lead churches, right? So what happens is, or what can happen, not all, this isn't universally true, but an ethics professor may teach something in an ethics class in seminary. A future pastor hears that lesson, absorbs some of it, and goes on to lead a congregation. And those lessons that they've learned, hopefully in the ethics seminar from seminary days, come out in the way they lead their congregation, right? So I think that some of the teaching and writing is now starting to filter into congregations, which is great. I also think that there's an increasing number of Christian congregations who are really taking seriously this crisis that we have of climate change, and realizing that the ways that we have always existed, or the ways that many of us, particularly in the West and particularly in the global North, many of the ways that those of us in the church, in the global Northwest church, have trod upon the earth, has caused so much damage, and it's really incumbent upon us to quickly and aggressively change the way we behave towards the earth and towards others who inhabit the earth. I think those two awarenesses are having a great impact. And also, I think the reality too is that it's much easier. It's much easier to be vegan now, or to adopt even a mostly plant-based diet than it ever has been for a lot of us. And so what used to maybe seem impossible or very unpleasant, back to the cardboard veggie burger days, may now seem much more appealing and much less daunting to a lot of people. That may also be part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's such good news. It's just great to hear that. And
Yeah.
One of the things that Lisa and I are doing with the Interfaith Vegan Coalition is trying to help people talk to their pastors and people they know that are, leaders in their faith. And but what thoughts have you got? What are some ways that we could use your books to talk to Christians or to ministers? And are there some resources in your books that would help us talk about how the Bible might have been misinterpreted as far as animals are concerned? And so can we use them?
I think Evangelical is particularly helpful for that. It was written. There's just 3 little chapters of theology that are pretty straightforward, and then about a chapter, so 5 chapters on kind of each of the major categories of animal use, sort of dispelling some of the myths that people may have about how animals are used, and the consequences of that use. And there are discussion questions at the end of every chapter, so it's good as a small group resource. And I also wrote both books with the idea that there are some common misperceptions that people have, that Christians may have about animals, about animal people, about vegans, about our motivations. And I tried to, in both books, dispel some of those myths and make it clear that I'm writing to other Christians. I'm writing as a Christian to other Christians, right? We share a common belief. They differ by degree. There are a bajillion different denominations in the U.S. alone, right? So not everyone will agree on every minute point, but some of the main things are things that we can all agree on. And I tried to just keep it simple, so that we could focus on the reality that what's happening to animals is unlike anything we've seen before. It's happening on a scale that is appalling and ought to be appalling, and that it's our privilege and our responsibility as Christians to take seriously this reality and then to act on it. And so I hope that the books by themselves can be useful because they'll address a lot of questions that people may have about what it means to be Christian in relation to animals. There are also some tools and tips and resources in the books for, if you want to go vegan but aren't sure how, if you aren't sure where to find cruelty-free household cleaning products, for instance. That's a list in the book of what I have in my shelf, on my bathroom shelf at that moment in time when I wrote the book, or places where you might go if you need a vegan mentor, that kind of thing. So it's got some resources, but just the very nature of the book writing process was to think about what are some common pushbacks and how can I help resource people who want to have those conversations in their churches.
That sounds really great. So people who are listening in who are Christian, who go to a church, could maybe have a book study. Maybe that would be one thing they could do with one of your or both of your books. And then people who are listening in who may not be Christian, but let's say they have Christian friends or something like that. There might be some. Are there any mention of passages in the Bible that
Oh
people
yeah.
argue about?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Lots of times we say, just don't get into an argument like that. But there might be some that you've talked about in your books that
Yeah.
might be
I think
possible to actually talk about.
yeah, I think in both books I give I talk about some of the possible, I talk about some specific scriptures that people may use, wield as a sword, and some of the ways that you can have a dialogue with somebody who's doing that. And one of the general pieces of advice is ask questions. Um, I don't find it always super helpful to kind of take a scripture out of context and try to use it. Generally, I think the story of the overarching story of Scripture, that God created and loves the world, that it's broken now, but that our hope is that the whole created world will be reconciled back to the Creator in this peaceable, as visioned in this peaceable kingdom, right? If we can talk about that story and our place in that story and our responsibilities in that story, I think we can avoid getting into some of the maybe unhelpful, particularly if you're not like looking at a scripture in context. We can avoid getting into some of the unhelpful, like, but Jonah 4:9 and but Genesis 9:3, and just I don't find those conversations really useful. I think it's just arguing for arguing's sake, but talking about the story and our responsibility, I think, is a good way to go. But yes, the books both address some scriptures that are commonly, pulled out at tablings. For instance, I remember the first time I ever tabled, and somebody came up to me and said, "Well, what about Peter's vision?" And I was 21, and I had no idea about Peter's vision. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I went home and I read it, and I was like, that does seem problematic, does it? So I looked at that some more, and I have a reply now that I can say. Yeah, so the book does talk about some of those scriptures. I wanted to mention before I forget that CreatureKind has a 6-week small group course that can be used in a group, or it can also be used as an individual study for people who. And I'm thinking particularly in the individual context, if you're a Christian but not connected with a congregation that you think is ready or willing to engage with the small group material, that's fine. You can just run through it by yourself. But for people who are not Christian, but who have Christians in their lives, or who want to be able to talk a little bit more authentically, or speak the Christian language, so to speak, if that's something that is desirable. The course is 6 weeks, and it just goes over a very broad view of animals, of the place of animals in Christianity. Talks about, do animals go to heaven? What about Jesus and animals? Some of the big questions, and then does get into a week of palatable, like not graphic but realistic discussion of farming today and farming practices, and then asks, so what should our response be? And for somebody who has Christians in their lives and who wants to talk to Christians, it may be a really good way to kind of understand the context from which those Christians are coming, and be able to engage with them in a little bit more of an informed or authentic way.
Well, that sounds really useful. So that's part of CreatureKind.
Yeah,
so
you can find the course at becreaturekind.org. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right. And what's the basic mission of CreatureKind?
So CreatureKind's basic mission is to engage the church in awareness of animal welfare, with a particular focus on farmed animals.
Okay.
There are kind of 3 main strategies that we use. We want to work with Christian communities to get them to reduce the amount of animal products they consume, right? at least. We would love it if everyone went vegan, but big institutions may not be able to do that. So at the very least, getting folks to realize what a crisis we're in, and to reduce the amount of animal products consumed by like a university, for instance, or a denomination is important. We want to provide educational resources like the 6-week small group course to churches and to Christians and Christian communities and activists. And we also want to be a place that can support Christian animal advocates. We have found again and again and again that there are many of us who care deeply about this issue. And in far too many cases, those of us who have been blessed to care about animals are absolutely rejected from our local congregations. We are made fun of or pushed out. One woman that I interacted with was called a devil worshiper by her pastor, and that was an extreme case, but many of us wind up feeling quite isolated, and it's a shame, right? It's a shame for the church because they lose out on a passionate, those people often end up leaving, and sometimes they never come back. And, community is important. And if they don't find another community to connect with, they lose out on community, and that's really a tragedy. It's also a tragedy for the community that loses them because they're oftentimes wildly passionate, brilliant people who have a lot of energy and who want to help us be better, and not, and shutting them down and not allowing them to sort of lead us, even if we struggle or resist being led, is a shame. So we want to provide a way for people to be able to stay resilient in difficult situations and stay connected to a local congregation while also being able to be connected to people who are really like-minded, who get what it's like to try to get your church to adopt a policy where a vegan meal is offered at every function, or who get what it's like to try to talk to a pastor about why having a petting zoo at the fall fair is not okay, and on and on and on, right? There are lots of resources and lots of human resources out there of people who have done this and who have been having these conversations and who have been making little inroads in their churches for a long time, and we'd like to try to connect them to one another, and just to a broader community so they can feel like they can stay and do good work. Because what I also find is that oftentimes a local pastor who's juggling a million different things, may have 2 or 3 jobs, they are so much more likely to trust and want to listen to an insider, somebody from their own congregation, somebody they have a relationship with already. Outside forces are not often welcome, for better or for worse. And so, I know that I can make an appointment and go sit down with my pastor anytime. But if I try to call a church 45 minutes away, or even, next door to the church that I attend, it's not likely that I'm going to get a meeting really quickly. So the more individuals that we have in local congregations who are having conversations and who are helping people make changes and who are helping their pastors realize how important this issue is, who are forming little groups who make big waves, I think that the better off the whole church and the movement will be.
Yeah, I so agree with you, Sarah. That's something really big that we can do as activists. We can have such a huge influence, like you said, from the inside.
Yeah.
So it's really wonderful that you guys are offering this resource to everybody. Is there a conference that CreatureKind is planning?
So we're in dialogue with a lot of different Christian animal groups. There are a number of different blogs and individuals and segments of larger organizations who care about this issue and care about the intersection of Christianity and animals. As part of that dialogue, we've discussed having a gathering. Exactly what that gathering looks like is a question that we're still trying to discern, because, obviously conferences can be very resource intensive. and maybe not the best use of resources. So we just want to be really wise about what we do. We want to be sure that we're providing something that people need, and that will be a helpful resource for folks. So I think at this point we're listening and discerning what the right frame is for what we know is an important thing, which is to gather together like-minded folks in some way. Exactly what that looks like is yet to be determined.
Okay, so we'll just keep watching CreatureKind for announcements about that.
Yes, and the other spaces too. We're not the only game in town.
Okay. So one thing that we always ask, because it's a critical issue for all of us, and you've touched on it somewhat, is the sadness that we deal with, the mourning and the anger that we deal with as activists, but we're looking toward our spirituality, I think, as a possible help to help us feel the peace that we need to have in order to be strong and stay the course and not give up. So I wondered what you personally do to cope with all the bad news that comes across your computer and all that.
Yeah. I pray quite a lot. Praying for me isn't exactly a formal affair. It's some yammering on, and it's some just trying to be quiet and listen. There have been seasons of my life where I've been a part of a faith community, and there have been seasons of my life where I have not been part of a faith community. And hands down, being part of a faith community, even if nobody else there is exactly on the same page as I am, is an important thing for me. I help lead worship at the congregation that I attend. I go to church gatherings and hang out with folks from church, and I'm a very selfish person, and so I think one of the things that doing those things does for me is help me get out of myself and my own head and my own world, right? And so prayer and community are two huge things for me. I also, I armed myself in a nonviolent way, obviously. But when I was feeling really despondent and I didn't know how to answer questions that were coming at me, and I had my own questions that I didn't have answers to, I was fortunate enough to be able to find a scholarship and go to seminary. But books are available. Books are available to many people, and I think for the Christian faith tradition, there's a wealth of great books written that talk about this issue, and that was extremely empowering to be able to read and understand and have a language to talk about what I knew in my gut to be true. I wanted to mention quickly too that Carol Adams, who's a Presbyterian Presbyterian, I'm not sure if she's a pastor, but she's a Presbyterian and she's a pretty well-known writer, has a book called Prayers for Animals. That's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. We used it. I had a retreat for Christian animal advocates last winter, and we used it as our gathering. We used prayers from that every time we gathered to begin our time, and it was amazing. It was an amazing resource. And then she has other prayer books as well, written for particular contexts like loss, joy. I can't remember all of them. There are 4 or 5 that are just marvelous resources that I think probably not enough people know about.
Great. Well, thanks. Yeah, those are all helpful thoughts. So we like to have a question and answer time, and I think it's about time for that. Is there anything you would like to add before we change over to question and answer?
Just, I think, thank you for having me. And I know, I don't know how many folks on the call are Christian versus not Christian. For those, well, for both, I would say, I know that we Christians can be really maddening. And I apologize on behalf of my brothers and sisters and fellow Jesus followers, especially those of us who are very slow to get this issue. But know that there are a lot of really compassionate people out there who want to do good, and it's hard to be patient with us. It's very hard to be patient with us, but I think when I've been patient with folks and kind, and gentle, that has resulted in some surprising and wonderful conversations and changes as well.
Wow, thanks. Yeah, that's really important, to be kind and to demonstrate, what your faith is really leading you to be kind and loving, and that's kind of very similar to veganism in a lot of ways, because we're trying to say, this is the way we live with kindness, and people go, oh, so this isn't all just anger and yelling and screaming and carrying signs. This is actually a way to live with kindness. So, and Christianity is very similar to that. And when you want people to see how it makes you feel. So,
and see the connections too between this and other really important issues of justice. That these things that many of us care about are all connected to it. They're connected to each other. We're connected to each other, and it's probably not a coincidence. And so I think I think what we are facing, the reality is that there's a crisis for animals, and there's a crisis for the planet, and there's a crisis for all of the inhabitants of the planet at this moment. But and I used to feel like, I've got to change everything right now, but patience has paid off in a lot of ways for me and for the people that I've talked to. And I'm not a patient person, and it's very, very hard. And it's something that I have to remind myself of every day, that I don't control the outcome of the world. And all I can do is what I can do.
Yeah, we all need to remember that. That's for sure.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very hard.
It is. So, Lisa, can you open us up to Q&A? Are you there?
Sure, yeah,
There
I'm
she
here.
is.
It's been a really amazing conversation that you both are having, and we have some people who are with us in the webinar, and we have people who have joined us on different Facebook pages and different Facebook groups. So I really invite anyone to ask a question. You can do so in the chat box, and another way to do it is if you're on the phone with us in the webinar, you can press *4 and that will unmute you on the phone, and you can actually just ask a question right now to Sarah. Another possibility is when you came on, if you're on the webinar with us, your microphones are muted, and we turned off your webcam so we could focus on our speaker. Now you can turn them back on and just ask a question if you have one, or say a comment. That's fine. Oh, and
Lisa,
yes.
I just wanted to just mention quickly that since I am on my phone, so you don't see my fingers all over the screen, if you could read any questions that come in via chat, that would be amazing.
Perfect. We'll be honored to do that. I will tell you that right now, Kathy Dunn, who also works for another Christian advocacy organization, she is with us here, and she's just saying hello. Awesome job. She's so excited about what you're sharing with our community. Yeah. And
Kathy is amazing, and she runs, oh man, my brain, shepherding God's creatures, shepherding God's creatures. Yes, a blog, and it's amazing. It's a great resource.
Yes, and
shepherding all God's creatures.
for those of you who have been aware of what we're doing, Jessica, Jessica Lopez, who works with Kathy Dunn, was also going to join us, but wasn't able to today. So we will have them on another time to share more about what they're doing. And we're just so excited to learn about all of this Christian advocacy going on. Many people in the animal rights movement might wonder about Christianity and about just because of all those confrontative people who come up and talk about the Bible and all these things and ask vegans, what about this and what about that? But here we're getting a really interesting voice from the Christian community that's saying, hey, we care about animals too. And I know also that there's so many animal ministries, which is even for those communities who they may not be vegan, but they have animal ministries in their churches, which is a step for sure. So we do have a question, and it says, do you have any book that might be for Unitarian ministers, or would it be the same one that you mentioned, for example, the one by Carol Adams? What are some of the books that you recommend?
So I would have a question, which is books for like theology books or spiritual resources would be the question that I have.
The
if you want to ask that, and yes.
Yes, the answer is yes for theology books, and you can throw a couple of spiritual books in there too.
Sure.
For the rest of our community.
Specifically for Unitarians is hard for me because I think the Unitarian tradition is much broader than my specifically Christian training. My understanding is that a wider variety of theological approaches may be appropriate or may be well received, depending on the particular Unitarian minister. I have some Unitarian friends, and I'd be happy to ask them and get back to you. In general, a couple of the books that I think are particularly helpful. There's one called, oh man, I have a little bit of conference brain, so I apologize. There's a book that's edited by Trip York and Andy Alexis Baker, put out by Cascade Books, called something. Actually, here's a better answer. I have a bibliography on becreaturekind.org on the blog. There's a long list of recommended books, articles, and children's books as well. The Trip York, Andy Alexis Baker book is one of those books. And I'd be happy to send a link to Lisa and Judy that they could put up along with this webinar, if that's helpful. Rather than me trying to remember the names of books, that would probably be best. But there's a bibliography or a recommended reading list on CreatureKind's website that's excellent. And if I do say so myself.
We actually posted your website in our chat box, and for anybody who wants to go there, it's becreaturekind.org, and you can go there and you'll find this amazing bibliography and recommended readings. So I'm going to actually check that out too. That's wonderful to know.
Good. Thank you, and thank you for having patience with my end of the day brain.
Oh, I think we all have that to some extent. So now we have another person who shared that they love a book called The Dominion of Love by Norm Phelps, if anyone wants a good read. And I know Norm Phelps has written a book called The Longest Struggle about the animal rights or animal welfare movement within our culture, and has some other spiritual books as well. So so let's see if there's any other questions. And of course, if you'd like to pop on with your... Oh, I hear someone.
This is Frank Lane. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Frank.
Hi. Sarah, that's fantastic. I love the work you're doing, and thank you so much. It's great. So I have a few questions for you. What do you say to people that say, well, what's the difference between a plant and an animal and their suffering? I get that question a lot. Do you have an answer for that?
That is so interesting. So there are two kind of responses that I've used in the past. One is that I don't say this, but I'm not a botanist, right? So I don't totally understand the intricacies of plant behavior. But I can see pain on my dog's face when she gets a thorn in her paw. I know that she has a brain and a central nervous system. I know that she has desires. We know a lot about animal sentience, and I don't have the same level of awareness about the ability of plants to suffer, right? Not just to react to stimuli, but to suffer in the way that we understand suffering. That said, if somebody really is particularly concerned about plant pain, we might point out to them that by feeding massive numbers by eating plants directly rather than feeding them to animals and then in massive numbers and then eating the animals, we're reducing plant suffering in the best way that we can.
Good answer.
Yeah.
I like that. I usually say it's a great difference to cut the head off of an animal than it is a carrot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely. Let's see. Did I have another question? Oh, thanks for giving Herman back from experimentation. Your animal?
Oh, Simon, yes.
Simon. Oh, great. That was great. That was a great story. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I hold vegan potlucks every month here in Orange County, which is great, and we have a lot of people of different faiths that come. Do you have any suggestions on how to get more Christians to come? Especially, I attend a Catholic church, and it's been very hard having people make that transition between the sentience of animals and let's say their pets.
Mm-hmm. Have you invited people from your church to the potluck?
I have, and sometimes we do potlucks, and I invite them to the vegan potlucks that I have as well. So that has been helpful.
Yeah. So I think that the best way to get, for that kind of thing, it seems to me that a good way to get more Christians around the vegan potluck table would be for people who are there and who have relationships with Christians to invite them and encourage them to come, and then make sure they felt, welcomed and not interrogated too hard, and had a good time, right? I think I really value relationship and the power of personal relationship, and the extraordinary impact that one person can have. And so if every person that came to your potlucks regularly had a Christian friend or two or three that they would commit to inviting regularly, right? That might help increase and might be the most effective way to increase attendance. Donuts also always work.
Yeah, good. Donuts. Thank you. Anyway, again, thank you for your work.
Thank you for
Much
your
appreciated.
activism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank, for tuning in and asking those questions. And now it looks like we have another question. Thank you. Please tell us your name.
Hi, this is Lisa. Lisa, can you hear me? Hi.
Oh, it looks like we have two at once. So why don't we, let's go with who was on the phone, because they can't really see us as well. So tell us your name if you're on the phone.
Hi, can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Monique.
Hi, Monique. We can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Well, I just heard a little bit of it, so I'm uncertain if you brought this up, but last night I was listening to the show Coast to Coast AM,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a pastor on there talking about the red heifer who was just born. And this is supposed to be some sort of sign regarding Revelations. And it's a Jewish and Christian both believe that this heifer needs to be sacrificed. What would you have to say to this tradition that people are now saying it must be done in order to fulfill the prophecy?
So I will be honest and say I do not know what that is about, and I would have to research.
You must Google. You must Google because it's
I will
everywhere.
demonstrate one of the keys of effective advocacy: knowing when you don't know and saying that out loud. So I'd be happy to look into it, but off the top of my head, that doesn't sound. It sounds vaguely familiar, but it's not really a part of my everyday tradition or understanding. So I'm not sure I could give a good response. I'm sorry.
No problem. Well, Google, because it's in many major newspapers now, and this red heifer needed to be born in Israel, and it was August the 28th, and I think there was a blood moon or something, so yes, it'll probably be discussed heavily now by conservative traditionalists with regards to Revelations.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one woman that called the show. She was from New Jersey, and I tried to call. I couldn't get through, but she was saying the same as me, like, this is horrific that one would sacrifice an animal in the name of saving the world.
Yeah, and I think, generally, nuances aside, and there are many, but we can say that Christ already paid the ultimate sacrifice. We Christians don't participate in the temple sacrifice system, in part because we believe that Jesus himself was the sacrifice, right? And there are many, 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 many takes on that broad brush theological statement, but that's just the beginning, right? That we don't need to sacrifice animals anymore. It's not part of what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you for bringing that up, Monique. We'll definitely be looking into that. I have not heard of that, and I wonder if any Israeli animal rights groups are aware of that, because it happened in their country, and there's many different religious affiliations in Israel, so it might be interesting to reach out to them. And meanwhile, we can all do some research on that. So thanks for bringing it up.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Monique.
And then we had another question, actually from somebody who's on our webinar with us with the video. So I think if you don't mind hearing your question, tell us your name again.
Okay, my name's Becky. This is Coco. And I wanted to know, I loved your talk. Thank you so much. It's very good.
Thank you.
I wanted to know if you have this myth going on in your church like we do, that small farms are okay. I'm going to raise chickens. I'm going to get a cow and have my own little farm, and it seems to be such a grip on them of an ideal life.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually say something about like it's not really sustainable, but that doesn't really address the animal's life. And I wonder if you sense that or have that also.
Yeah, that's a great. You've touched on a great tension, right? I've noticed an increasing number of people who are captivated by this kind of pastoral idea, and Christian theologians like Norman Wurzba and Fred Bonson, and others, Wendell Berry, I think, who encourage us to get back in touch with the land and to re-engage with what it means to grow food. you probably all know that something like 2% of Americans are now involved in farming. And it was nearly 100% 130 years ago. It went very quickly from the vast majority of people being involved in raising their own food and to almost no one. And that coincided with the rise of factory farms, which we don't need to go into how terrible they are. And so there's this tension, right? Because in some way, yeah, if farms were smaller, some of the abuses that exist now might not be as bad, or might not exist, or would exist on a much smaller scale. For me, for me though, the question has always come down to, would I kill an animal for food? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't kill an animal for food. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary. And if it's not necessary to kill to eat, why would I? And that's me personally, right? In advocacy, it's a harder question to answer, because you don't want to seem like the person who's never satisfied with any change. We want to applaud meaningful changes. And we want to recognize that not everyone, I don't think that everyone will be able to go vegan overnight, right? For many people, it's a process. And it's important, I think, that they start on the path. And so this is an active, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is an active struggle for me too. And I'm figuring out how to engage well with people and say, okay, that's a nice idea, but what does it mean for what does it mean for you on the ground? What are the practical changes that you are making, right? We can have the idea that we want to buy only quote unquote happy hen eggs. But do you know what that means, right? And are you prepared to actually, because I think a lot of folks just don't, and a lot of, there's this real tendency to sort of fall for marketing labels and not really investigate where our food is coming from. And so are these ideas that we like the sound of resulting in actual change for animals? And I think probably in most cases the answer is no. And so what does that mean? And how do we have to, what do we then do as a result? But I feel you. I mean, I feel you a lot. And I hear it and I see it. And I don't want to leave those people, I don't want to leave those folks out of conversation. I don't want to stop conversing I don't want to stop dialogue with them. I don't want to, but the problem is big, and not everyone will do that, and not everyone should. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Is probably the most difficult question, I think. And we had it asked not only from Becky, but from another person on our chat box. That idea of humane farms or humane meat or the humane labels. And it is a very interesting question, because you want to bring people who are concerned about the treatment of animals a step closer towards compassion for animals in their choices of what to eat and where. And in this case, it's a tricky one. Sometimes I share with people, well, the animals end up at the same slaughterhouses, and they have the same experiences. And what an incredible betrayal that would be if you grew up on a very like a happy type of farm with a couple of cows and dogs and other animals. In fact, I saw that there's a program called the 4-H Club, and I did witness that a few girls who were so excited about their I think pigs they had raised, but maybe didn't realize that the next step was what going to market really meant. And actually, I have met people who have become lifelong vegetarians, if not vegans, because of those programs, and cried as they told me the story of the last look they had with their pigs. So I think these are the realities that Sarah was telling us about, the realities of the situation.
Yeah, it's like I find when people who I'm in relationship with want to make a change, and that's the first change. If that's the first change they make, okay. Hope we have to keep talking, and I have to keep talking to them about you know it's not industrial farms are a huge problem, but really what I'm getting at is that like we don't need to be killing animals. We don't need to be doing that. We don't need to be keeping them on farm. We don't need to be breeding them just to die. We don't need to be doing that. The vast majority of us don't need that. Um, and and but keeping in effective like open um, conversation, even though we kind of want to tear our hair out, right? I want to tear my hair out every day to some extent. Um, Helps those people go beyond that first, oh, I care and I want to do something step to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And I've seen it, I mean, in my relationships, in my personal relationships, I've seen it again and again and again. Folks who start with, oh, I didn't realize that happened to egg laying hens. I'm going to buy my eggs from a farmer's market to, I just got an email a couple of weeks ago from a woman who I've been talking to for a while who's been vegan for 4 weeks now, you know. And if I had pushed and cajoled and yelled at her from the get-go, she probably would have just cut me off. Wouldn't have gone over well. Yeah. So it's hard, and it's hard, and it's hard. But keep at it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving us these insights that you've had. And that's the importance of having conversations with all of us together, is that we all get to learn from each other and say, oh, I relate to that experience or that conversation. And I think that's how we move our society, our worldwide culture into one of more compassion and peace and love for all beings. And I know that in the animal rights world, some of those humane farms have been investigated by groups such
Yeah.
as like Direct Action Everywhere. I know people personally who've been into those
Yeah.
types of places and said that it wasn't
Yeah.
at all what the
No.
advertisement was. So I think that advertising and some of the larger corporations, may not be uh, as honest about what they're doing behind closed
No.
doors.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. No. Every person that I talk to about this hears from me that marketing is not reality. That labels lie, and that you have to go and see for yourself what it is that you're participating in, or the integrity just isn't there. Yeah.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. I know that we've had such wonderful questions, and I just really appreciate everybody's participation. I think we're kind of at the time where we would normally wrap up, and somebody asked how to find this on our Facebook page and that they'd like to share it. You can go to Vegan Spirituality or on Facebook. It's Vegan Spirituality Community, and search for that, and you will pull up this live video under our videos. If you look in the contents there, it's under videos, and that's a good way to find it. And if you've registered for this, meaning if you're on the webinar, you will get an email with the replay link tomorrow, and then you can share it far and wide. It'll be on YouTube. So on YouTube, you'll be able to search under Sarah's name, Sarah Withrow King, and you can also look under Vegan Spirituality and you'll find it. So there's lots of ways to connect and to find us. Thank you so much.
Of course. And can I just add that I am happy to, I don't know if there were questions that we didn't get to. I'm happy to connect with folks via email. I'm much more articulate in writing than I am verbally. Or I could try to write a little short Q&A blog follow-up or something along those lines. But if we didn't get to questions, and I do have to run, but if we didn't get to questions, I would like a chance to be able to answer them if that's still, if that would be valuable or helpful.
Yeah. So, can people reach you on the website? Like if they go to Be
Yeah, if
Creature
there's a
Kind?
contact page on the CreatureKind website. Yeah.
That's perfect. So if anybody here on if you're watching from any platform, please go to becreaturekind.org. They have a contact us page there, and you can reach Sarah directly. And thank you for the invite to let us
Yeah.
contact you.
Yeah.
So as we close, we usually close with a little blessing or prayer. Does anybody want to do that for us? Okay, you're
Happy to.
elected.
Yeah. Creator God, thank you for the opportunity to be in space with folks who are trying to do a little better by the world, by one another, and help us to know the right next thing to do. Please, in particular, bless those who are right now in pain, who are alone, who are feeling suffering. God, make your creative, loving presence known to them. Thank you for your gifts. Help us to use them well. Amen.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much. We're honored to receive the blessing and also to share in this community together tonight. And thanks to everybody. We hope you'll join us again. We do gather each month. It's the second Thursday of every month. And it's from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, but that will change on your time zone. So we hope to see you again next time. And for anybody who would like support, we do have a support line which you can reach out to at 800-705-0425, and that's for any concerns you have around your activism, or if you're trying to reach out to your church. And a little announcement: we're taking it on the road. The Interfaith Vegan Coalition is heading to the Parliament of World Religions. So stay tuned. We'll tell you more about that next time too. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.